The next topic on the agenda is what I wanted to provide for folks is a quick overview of the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee. And this is something that I'll admit to folks I really needed to do. I've served on the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee for 8 years. So I've served on this subcommittee for 8 years, and I realized in the time that I spent on the subcommittee, there never had been a kind of a primer on what was the genesis of this subcommittee, how was it chartered, what do we do, what is our role, what is the role relative to other agencies and entities who serve on the committee. So I went back to the records for the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee and tried to pull out all that historical material and summarize that to try to give a better sense of what we're about and what we're not about. So the subcommittee was established under the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee through an MOU between the Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture in 1983. It was initially just between the two departments, and a year later the 3 states were added as part of that MOU: Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. All of this, for folks who want to track it, a lot of this background material is on the IGBC website. So if you just Google IGBC, you can find a lot of this kind of historical or legacy material. The stated purpose of the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee was acknowledged to achieve the recovery of the grizzly bear. It's necessary that federal and state agencies with responsibility for the species coordinate management and research actions to the greatest extent possible to ensure best utilization of available resources and prevent duplication of effort. So really that basic framework of that the agencies and entities really needed to work together across boundaries. The committee responsibilities as listed in that initial charter, that initial charter defined all the individual subcommittees under the IGBC, and under the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee, the responsibilities were to implement the grizzly bear recovery plan and all management and research activities necessary to provide for recovery of the grizzly bear, direct research activities to that end, and make joint recommendations to federal agency heads and governors. So then in the annals of this group, there's a long series of meeting minutes and notes and yearly action plans and cross-boundary strategies to really address how do you manage a bear with that long-term goal of recovery. What I could never find in the notes was a charter for YES that stood alone outside of the IGBC charter. And I've asked a few folks, so if anyone has a record of that a YES charter exists, I could not find it in all of my looking. What I did find was a charter for YGCC. YGCC was the Yellowstone Grizzly Bear Coordinating Committee, was the evolution when the bear went through the delisting process last time and was delisted in 2007. There was an acknowledgement from this entire body that the hard work didn't end, that the coordination, the efforts had to continue, and they had to continue across agency boundaries. And so there's a charter for YGCC, and that speaks to purpose, duties, and scope, that you would coordinate implementation of a conservation strategy, you'd ensure monitoring and reporting on the status of the population and habitat, you'd share information and implement management actions in a coordinated fashion, you report annually to IGBC, identify shortfalls in management, research, and financial needs, pursue financial resources and budgets to successfully implement the conservation strategy, and implement biology and monitoring reviews and submit a petition for relisting if and when appropriate. So kind of acknowledging even in a delisted bear, there's always that obligation to adapt to change conditions and petition for relisting if necessary. So this was the charter that was signed off in 2007 for YGCC. The authorities for YGCC include revising or amending the conservation strategy based on best available science, that those revisions would be subject to public review and comment and approved by the signatories to the 2007 strategy. You'd establish meeting rules, procedures, and the chairperson. You'd seek funding and develop partnerships to further conservation, and that each agency would be responsible for seeking their necessary funds. It was also very clear that the committee itself whether it's yes or YGCC, does not supersede the authority of the individual management agencies. No agency that comes to the table gives up their authority in this process and their responsibilities that they have, whether it's Fish and Wildlife Service or the Park Service or the BLM or the Forest Service or the tribal governments. Oops. So key accomplishments through Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee. This is pretty hard to capture in one slide, but the soundbite for me is that it's clear when you look at the history of yes and the cross-boundary coordination that happened, that many of the agreements that are embedded in that 2007 conservation strategy and in many of the agency plans and processes never would have been achieved without that interagency coordination and cooperation across boundaries. There were, if you search through the notes on this committee, and some of you probably have this legacy history beyond the 8 years I've been with the committee, but you can see a record of a lot of different debates and perspectives and compromises that individual agencies or units within agencies really made to achieve something that was greater than their own individual unit. And the ones that come to mind is how you implement food storage and management of bear attractants across the ecosystem. Lots of work on habitat management standards, and I'll speak for the Forest Service at the time. When you look at the records, this was highly controversial for the National Forest units and the Forest Service at the time. How an individual forest really bought on to some changes in how they managed National Forest System lands really for the good of the people. And that speaks to secure habitat, how you manage road densities, how you think about livestock grazing and management of grazing into the future, and how you manage to develop recreation sites. And then, of course, there was the whole emphasis on consistent information and education efforts, and the culmination of that development of the 2007 conservation strategy. My pitch in all of this is, I think when we look forward, I think it's sometimes easy to forget all the accomplishments that have led us to this point. So regardless of how people feel about the long-term status of bear management, I think it's really worthwhile looking at the last 3 decades of coordinated work and just acknowledging that that really has served the Yellowstone grizzly bear well. So the role of yes, what it is and what it isn't. So the idea of yes is that it would work for common good across boundaries, that the committee doesn't assume the authority held by any member agencies. Again, I spoke to that, but I think it's pretty important because I know in comments I received for this meeting, people want the yes committee to take on a role of hearing comment on a delisting decision. But that's clearly vested with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the committee doesn't assume responsibility to member agencies. We serve in an advisory role, we share priorities, and we do commit resources to those common goals that we identify. In the record, the yes committee operates on a majority vote. There have been multiple times where the committee has struck for consensus, but the record says operates on a majority vote. The role of the committee is not to complete government-to-government consultation with tribal nations and tribal governments. There's key partners on the yes committee, but the role of consultation falls to the agencies with the action, whether it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or U.S. Forest Service or BLM, have that responsibility for that government-to-government consultation. The committee can clearly make recommendations on potential delisting that would represent the perspectives of the member agencies. And probably the biggest part of yes in the record and the history so far is the work that this group has done relative to a conservation strategy. Those commitments that you would put forth and agree to that would come into place when the bear is delisted. And those commitments are, they're important, they're based on best available science, and they do bind the parties as you move forward. And then finally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service holds the public process and the decision authority for delisting. Yes, protocols, this is what's in the record, that the YGCC, again, would meet 2 times a year, and that's kind of been the record of yes. I can see in some ancient history, they have met more than that. There's been special meetings, but in general, it's been twice a year. There should be public notification of the meetings made by the chairperson. They're open to the public. Details on locations and times of meetings will be determined. And amendments to the charter are supposed to be amended with a vote of 2/3 of the members, and that's the charter that was in place in September of 2007. So again, I can't find in the record a formal yes charter other than the chartering of IGBC, the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, that is the umbrella committee, but we could find a charter when the bear was delisted in 2007. I think that gives an idea of the expectations of how the agencies would work together. And the final thing, and I wanted to put that out there because the next topic is really to move into the update from Fish and Wildlife Service, is to remind folks that in the November-December 2013 meeting, based on the meetings that had led up to that, and a review of peer-reviewed science relative to the status of the Yellowstone bear population, the yes group did reach consensus on a recommendation to IGBC that Fish and Wildlife Service move forward with a new proposed delisting rule.